Here, doctors and...
Cameron.
Croatians celebrate victory in Krajina, but is their triumph a prelude to peace or to a wider war? Good evening. All over, bar the misery of the Serb refugees. Tonight, the Croats announced that their reconquest of Krajina was complete, and they were ending their military blitz on the region. But so-called mopping up operations continue, and tens of thousands of refugees are fleeing, leaving the towns where they've lived for centuries empty. Newsnight's Mark Urban was one of the first TV journalists to reach the former Krajina capital of Knin.
This town was taken on Saturday. It wasn't until today that the final remnants of the Krajina Serb forces agreed to lay down their arms, bringing to an end a 4-year rebellion against Croatian rule.
And are the hordes of Serb refugees now pouring out of Krajina a sign that the Krajinian Serbs were abandoned to their fate by a deal struck between the Croatian and Serbian presidents? A top official from the Croatian Foreign Ministry debates with Paddy Ashdown, who may have evidence of an understanding. Plus, here in London, a former UN spokesman and the Yugoslav chargé d'affaires. Also tonight, Place Your Fire collapsed today after the Croats accused the Krajinian Serbs of trying to trick them. Croatia also reported Bosnian Serbs had launched airstrikes on a number of Croatian towns. But tonight, the UN said such reports could not be confirmed. And tonight, some of the first pictures of a refugee convoy, which was shelled on a road in northern Bosnia. It happened as up to 200,000 Serb refugees choked the roads to Bosnia or Serbia proper in the wake of Croatia's recapture of Krajina. Operation Storm, as Croatia called it, has once again transformed the map. Serb-controlled Krajina was attacked on Friday. By this morning, 80% of the region was back in Croatian government control, and Krajinian Serb refugees were fleeing to Banja Luka in Serb-held Bosnia. Newsnight's Mark Urban has been to Knin, the former citadel of the Krajinian Serbs.
To drive into Knin is to observe the end of a chapter in Balkan history. The Croatian army took the town on Saturday in a devastating offensive. 4 years ago, Knin was the epicenter of a Serbian revolt, a refusal to live as a minority in newly independent Croatia. Now the revolt is over, and the Serbs' refusal takes the form of flight. Croatian soldiers celebrate, but very few others are left here. 800 refugees are crowded into a UN camp on the outskirts of town, but most are Croatians or people in mixed marriages. Most of the Serbs have gone, though, and the UN has until today been unable to investigate claims of mistreatment by the few who remain.
We were able to see that close to our camp there were some houses which unfortunately there appeared to be some looting going on. And this was raised today in the meeting with Mr. Kashi with the officials of the Croatian army here. But in terms of widespread conduct of the Croatian army inside Knin, we're unable to verify because we're not allowed to have access to Knin to patrol it normally.
We drove to the village of Biskupja to try and find out what had become of one Serbian community. When the Croatian shelling of Knin, which is nearby, started last Friday, hundreds of people left this village, despite the fact that Serbians had farmed this land for centuries. Only a handful stayed behind. Most of the families had fled in minutes. Nobody had taken the washing in. Farm animals remained cooped up, and dogs hungry. We found Simo Debiliza in his tiny flat. He said he hadn't left because he was too sick, and told us about the moment that Croatian army soldiers arrived.
They were here 2 hours ago. They took my radio. They said nothing, and they took a can of fuel too.
Do you think Serbian people will come back here, or do you think you're the last one in the village now?
Who knows?
Hundreds of Serbs from Biskupje are now part of an exodus which UN officials are saying could exceed 150,000. In this Balkan war, terror has been as important an element in the creation of refugees as coercion, and in this village, the few who stayed behind testify to the fear of the many who left.
We were afraid they would come and cut our throats. We really were. They were burning houses down there across the fields in Vrbinik.
Some Croatian troops drove through in what appeared to be a stolen car. The looting has been extensive. I saw evidence too that in some places they may have put farms to the torch. These crimes may drive away the few Serbs who remain, but Croatia is in no mood to feel guilty about what it regards as the spoils of victory. For Franjo Tudjman, the Croatian president, the campaign has been a personal triumph. Yesterday, Croatian television showed his arrival in Knin as he went to the ancient citadel above the town.
Oslobođenje Knina jeste jedan povijesni čin.
The liberation of Knin is a historical act, and this moment in time marks the founding of modern, democratic Croatia. All the significant conditions for a stable Croatian state are now satisfied.
Ever since the military operation started, there's been a mood of nationalistic excitement. The state television station has been glorifying the units involved in the victory, with pop videos combining images from Hollywood, the church, and the country's formerly socialist system. But while this scene of soldiers returning from the front might seem like something carefully choreographed by the former Yugoslav propaganda ministry, it wasn't. We filmed it, and it was entirely spontaneous. The end of the Serbian rebellion means an end to shelling of many Croatian towns, and perhaps to the state of national mobilization which has existed since the country gained its independence in 1991. Among those celebrating in the port of Split at the weekend, there was a feeling that the country can only truly proclaim itself free now. These are highly charged days for Croats.
I don't know what to say. At times like this, I can barely speak. I'm too full of emotion.
But in this carnival atmosphere, there were also darker undertones. Where will the nationalist Croatians march next? More significantly, nobody I spoke to expressed any magnanimity towards the vanquished Serbs. Whatever their past crimes, forgiveness is needed to build a multi-ethnic state. Instead, there was a feeling here at least that two wrongs did make a right, and that revenge was sweet.
Some people can stay in Krajina if they want, others can go if they want. I don't care. They can even take their dirty shoes with them.
I hope the Serbs will leave, certainly from the Krajina region, and even that they'll go all the way to the Serbian border. That would be best for us.
But Serbs belong in Krajina. At St. Mary's Church in Biskupje near Knin, there's evidence of the generations of Orthodox Christians who lived here, and of the young men who sacrificed their lives for the short-lived Krajina Republic. The forces of Serb nationalism have been routed here, but is there a chance that the families who fled may return?
I think they will return, and should our people come back, I think we could live together with the Croats in the way we lived before.
A Croatian army helicopter flew overhead, perhaps carrying one of President Tudjman's victorious generals. In Knin itself, their troops are already beginning to move out. Where to next? After this 4-day campaign, the Bosnian Serbs must regard the prospect of further Croatian intervention in their war with dread. The price of military failure here is high. The Krajina Serbs have paid it. What is not yet clear is whether that experience will undercut Serb nationalism or reinforce it.
Mark Urban. Well, I'm joined now by Branko Salai of the Croatian Foreign Ministry. Mr. Salai, we've just been seeing film from Zagreb TV of your troops celebrating their victory, but there was no sign whatever of any magnanimity for the vanquished, of any concern that your victory had involved shelling innocent civilians.
Well, there is a very firm policy of my government not to shell civilians. I guess that in any war, some shelling of civilians is unavoidable. But I must say, and with some strength, that the government and the military leadership has absolutely been against any such practices. And I am certain that when the facts are known, it will be clear that this order has been followed practically throughout.
Well, you say that, but it seems that the Croats reneged on the ceasefire that had been agreed. Why did you do that?
Well, if you have 2 tank brigades and multiple rocket launchers placed in the middle of the column of people who are moving, civilians who are moving out, this is entirely against the rules of what was not a ceasefire but a rendition, on the terms of which the heavy arms, the armament of the troops was to be left in Croatia, and soldiers would be permitted to leave for Bosnia.
But you're saying that they were taking their heavy arms with them in the middle of the refugees so that you would not be able to, or feel less able to attack them?
That is correct.
You talked of keeping to the rules. Wasn't it a disgraceful breach of the rules for some of your troops to use UN people as human shields? And indeed, there are reports as well of a Croat throwing a grenade into a shelter that was housing UN troops.
To start with 7 Danes, which you obviously referred to, please recall the fact that there was an army of 100,000 people moving, and that one minor commander on one spot committed a terrible error for which he has been apprehended and will be put to court.
Okay, Mr. Salai, thank you very much. We'll come back to you again in a moment.
Thank you.
It was on a menu at a London V-Day banquet that Croatian President Franjo Tudjman supposedly sketched out plans for him and President Slobodan Milosevic of Serbia to carve up Bosnia between them. America is said to have given its unofficial blessing to this informal and strictly limited deal. Well, today, Russia's President Yeltsin criticised Croatia's offensive at the weekend, but invited Messrs Tudjman and Milosevic to Moscow for an immediate peace summit. David Sells asks whether the Croat triumph has finally broken the stalemate in the former Yugoslavia.
A deadly game of political chess, if game it is, for at stake are people's lives and livelihoods. Once again in the old Yugoslavia, there is an exodus. Refugees in their tens of thousands are on the move. This time, Serbs from the Krajina, who were among the first refugees 4 years ago. Theirs bids to be the biggest exodus of all.
Well, right now we know that some, over in the last 3 days, it's estimated some 15,000 have crossed the border. We figure there's anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 that are massed along the border, but that's very difficult to estimate. That's very, very gross estimates, and as we've said, there's anywhere from 150 to 200 to 250,000 people still on the move.
And if Serbian rocketing of Zagreb was to be dubbed a war crime, according to Europe's own mediator today, so must Croatian shelling of Knin.
No, I don't think anyone was really targeted. That's the problem. When you do as was done in May concerning Zagreb, and you just send a rocket in the general direction of Zagreb, you can never be certain where it hits. And it happened to hit civilians. And when you do the kind of artillery shelling that we've seen in Sarajevo and that we've seen now in Knin very extensively at the beginning of the offensive, I mean, it is bound to be something that goes against civilian targets. And that is something that I think the international community must react against.
Some fighting continues. The Croats even claimed that 4 of their towns were strafed by Bosnian Serb planes based across the border in Banja Luka. But the Croats have won. The Krajina is essentially theirs. And lest the Croats get carried away, armour and guns were seen today moving through the Serbian capital Belgrade, tens of kilometres away, heading to Croatia's other border. The Milosevic message to the Croats was clear: you have gone far enough. But the Serbian chess masters' devious games have left Krajina Serbs deeply disillusioned.
The refugees coming to Serbia and Belgrade are very bitter, but they are clear-headed, and it makes the situation even more tragic. The key word among the refugees is treason, and they are describing to us and to the general public, through a couple of independent radio stations here, the way the control, command, and communication chain of the Krajina Serb army collapsed.
Milosevic and Tudjman are mortal enemies, yet they do meet from time to time. Serbia and Croatia, you see, despite all the fighting and the flim-flam, might be seen to have a common interest. When it comes to the future of Bosnia, President Tudjman can be disarmingly undiplomatic. Indeed, if you were a Bosnian Muslim, you might say profoundly untrustworthy. Tudjman believes Bosnia should be part of Croatia, as it last was so notoriously in World War II. In May, at a VE Day banquet at the Guildhall here in London, quizzed by a neighbour at table, a certain Paddy Ashdown MP, as to how he saw Bosnia-Herzegovina in 10 years' time, Croatia's president sketched a little map on the back of a menu, and very revealing it was. The more so in that Mr. Tudjman then mused that he and Serbia's President Milosevic had what he called an understanding. Forget the place names, they were added later, but the S-shaped border he inked in showed a Bosnia partitioned between Croatia and Serbia. What is today Bosnian government territory has vanished from the map. Croatia sweeps in from the west, Serbia in from the east. Croatia absorbs all the Muslims. There's no room for a Muslim regime.
I think it is a very brutal map which would lead to the displacement of at least 1 million further people, and I would not find it acceptable. In whose name does Mr. Tudjman speak anyway? He can only speak in the name of Croats in Croatia, and the people who occupy those areas have to be represented by their own leaderships. In Bosnia, we have 3 parties. We had them before the conflict. We still have them today. The leaderships of the Bosnian Serbians, the Bosnian Muslims, and the Bosnian Croats. And unless their views are taken into account, I cannot see how there can be a peace deal.
Oh dear. But what about President Tudjman's famous menu map that he drew at the Guildhall in May?
Creating new states on the back of a packet of cigarettes is an old Balkan speciality, and President Tudjman has engaged in it on many occasions in the past. But the war is now approaching its end, at least as far as Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia are concerned. Paradoxically, the Muslims of Bosnia had their only room for maneuver as long as the Croats and the Serbs were still in confrontation. With that confrontation now being resolved by the sword, with Croatia assuming the military power equal to that of Serbia, there is no doubt that the knives are being sharpened for Bosnia itself.
And to cap it all, the Bosnian Serb camp is in deepest disarray. Radovan Karadzic has tried and failed to sack his top general, Ratko Mladic. Mladic, the sinister soldier, is now gunning for peace. Karadzic, the psychiatrist turned politician, plays the ultra-Serbian nationalist, a hawk of hawks. And the Serbs of the Krajina, a brother people, blown hither and thither like chaff in the wind, flee their ancestral homeland, filled with fear and paying a terrible price for for heeding such leaders.
David Sells. Well, joining in the discussion now is Paddy Ashdown, who's in Westminster, and here in the studio we have Michael Williams, formerly of the UN, and Rajko Bogojevic, the Yugoslav chargé d'affaires. Paddy Ashdown, what can you tell us about this possible deal or understanding that was sketched, supposedly, at that banquet on the back of the menu?
That we don't know that it exists, but we have very strong suspicions. I mean, the fascinating thing for the last 3 or 4 days has been the deafening silence of President Milosevic in the face of the removal from the Knin Krajina. Serbs who have lived there for 300 years, an area that is sunk deep into Serbian history. Why has Milosevic, why has Serbia proper done absolutely nothing to assist the Knin Krajina Serbs? And the answer to that is perhaps hinted at in the conversation I had with President Tudjman, leaked to the Times today, which was that there was an undertaking, not a deal, but an understanding, that President Tudjman could have the Knin Krajina if the Serbians hung on to Western Slavonia. Now, we don't know whether that's the case, but it's the only thing that explains that extraordinary silence. And then we must ask, what next? You see, the first moves in Bosnia and the Balkans are always very easy. It's where they end that matters. And is it the case, as seems to be indicated, and we must now question, whether or not the Serbs and the Croats are now going to divide Yugoslavia up into a greater Serbia and a greater Croatia? And if that's the case, it's absolutely vital that the international community, and especially the United States and Germany, whose leverage on the Croatians is the greatest, makes it absolutely clear that any interference with accepted borders is intolerable and cannot be accepted.
Well, let me go to Mr. Salai. Mr. Salai, was there some kind of understanding, very informal agreement between Serbia and Croatia?
No, there is no understanding, formal or informal. It is the type of speculation that appears every time geopolitical realities are changed, and we are in such a moment at this time. I'm astounded that serious politicians, as Mr. Ashdown, would place so much emphasis on something that we really don't know anything about. We have a sketch whereon President Tudjman is supposed to have drawn a line or two, and where some text has been put afterwards, and serious newspapers like the Times and Le Monde publish this as a proof of some kind of understanding.
Well, we've heard Mr. Ashdown say that it might be possible. Can I please ask Mr. Bogojevic, what do you think? Do you think there was some kind of, let's not call it a deal, that's obviously too hard for whatever might have happened, but some sort of very informal understanding of swapping the Krajina for Eastern Slovenia?
First, I do not believe in deals in the Balkans. Secondly...
Understanding them.
Yes. Secondly, we from the very beginning were in favor of a solution in Bosnia involving all 3 national groups living there. So it is quite obvious that our goal is not to divide Bosnia with Croatia, but to make peace in Bosnia involving all 3 groups, but equal treatment of all 3 groups.
What about there, Mr. Milosevic, just ignoring Bosnia if we can for one moment, what about Mr. Milosevic doing a deal on Eastern Slavonia and the Krajina?
There is no deal at all, because we are not able to help Krajina, unfortunately, because Yugoslavia is under the sanctions, as you know. And, but we have launched very strong diplomatic initiative in the Security Council everywhere, even here, to stop Croatian aggression on Krajina, on the territories where Serbs lived for over 300 centuries.
You haven't actually sent troops there, have you?
No, not at all.
It's all talk. Looks like it's going to stay that way. Well, let me go to Michael Williams. Regardless of whether there was an understanding, a deal, whatever we want to call it, how much of a watershed do you think this weekend was? Have we seen the end of what was once seen as a much greater Serbia?
I think we have. I think in that context it is a real turning point. The myth, if you like, of Greater Serbia has been defeated this weekend, not only in the battlefields of Krajina, but also in Belgrade, where, as Paddy Ashdown pointed out, President Milosevic was silent, and there was also no popular reaction on the streets of Belgrade to the fate of the Serb brethren in Krajina.
None at all?
A small demonstration on Saturday, which mustered a crowd of 800,
Right.
I think
so not significant.
Not significant. And my own belief is that, cruel though the events have been in the last several days, there is actually now a glimmer of hope that we may be moving towards the end game, not in the sense of a division of Bosnia, but to a more acceptable settlement. I think the Americans, for example, are going to be more amenable now to lifting the sanctions on Serbia, and that the rift within the Bosnian Serb leadership could possibly play out in a positive direction.
When you say positive direction, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can, because the diagram, for example, that President Tudjman drew on the back of his napkin at the Guildhall, there's a common ground now between the Bosnian Serbs and the Bosnian government, ironically, in resisting any such diktat, which is in the tradition of Balkan politics, being imposed upon them by Zagreb and Belgrade. So it may be that a greater rationality will enter the politics of Bosnia proper now.
Paddy Ashdown, do you think that sounds likely? Would you agree with what Michael Williams has just said?
Sue, we don't know. That's the $64,000 question.
But what would be your best guess?
Well, I genuinely don't know. I mean, the discussion I had with President Tudjman was one in which he told me he was going to do what he's just done in the Knin Krajina, and he told me he could do it in 8 days. It took him 3, and I didn't believe him, and of course it's now happened. I do not know what the intentions are. Maybe that map that he drew for me was a prediction. It may be that it was an intention. We don't know the truth of that. The central question is the one that Michael Williams has identified. Are we seeing the beginning of the end of the Balkan conflict as he believes is possible? Or are we, on the other hand, seeing the beginning of something much larger, which will involve the destruction of a state recognized by the international community, the last Muslim homeland in Europe, and something which will be inevitably lead to the UN withdrawal and a wider Balkan conflict? And we don't know which of those two is the option, and it all depends on Mr. Milosevic's response.
If you had to put money on it, would you go for peace or for greater war?
I think I'd probably, unfortunately, go for greater war. I think that the Croatians now have got their tails up, and I would like to hear Mr. Selay, on behalf of his government, give us an absolute categoric undertaking that they will respect the internationally recognized borders of Bosnia-Herzegovina. If that is what the Croatian government is now prepared to say, many of us will be greatly reassured.
Well, I'm afraid I can't ask Mr. Selay that because I'm afraid the line has gone down to Zagreb. We've lost him. But perhaps I could put the same point to Mr. Bogijevic. Do you think that there is, what are the chances that the borders of Bosnia will be recognized?
Yes, I hope so. But it is very important to stress that regular forces of Croatia are still in Bosnia, and they have to be withdrawn very, very soon from Bosnia if we want to have a settlement in Bosnia.
What does that mean? That sounds like you're going to carry on fighting.
We are asking for a withdrawal of regular troops of Croatia, Republic of Croatia, to be withdrawn from the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a first step. Of course, we are in favor of speedy cessation of hostilities and getting all parties together around the table to negotiate a peaceful settlement.
If the Croatians want Eastern Slavonia back, will you give it to them, or will you at least go to the negotiating table and hold peaceful discussions about
Eastern Slavonia is not ours. Yugoslavia is not having Eastern Slavonia. It is part of Krajina. It is held by Krajina Serbs, and having in mind that they have lost Krajina, at least temporarily, they do have rights to keep Eastern Slavonia.
But will you fight them? There's talk or reports of tanks going from Belgrade up there.
I'm certain that Serbs living there, they will fight. There is no doubt of that, to preserve that part, at least that smaller part of Krajina, under their control.
Michael Williams, that sounds like you're out, given that we've lost Mr. Selay, that sounds like you're outnumbered 2-1 when you thought there might be some chance of peace.
I still think there's a glimmer of hope. I mean, one other thing that's significant over this weekend is that the fear that many of us had of a renewed war between Serbia and Croatia has not happened. And in fact, I think the likelihood of that happening now is next to zero. President Milosevic has accepted the loss of Krajina. I'm afraid, despite what my colleague Mr. Bogijevic said, and also what Mr. Selay said, I am fairly certain that there's a tacit understanding between Zagreb and Belgrade with regard to Eastern Slavonia. Both presidents, in fact, virtually told Mr. Akashi in my presence in the past that this was the case.
What about the attitude of outsiders? Carl Bildt has been really rather written off by the Croatians today, and Michael Portillo, our Defence Secretary, has accused Croatia of ethnic cleansing. I mean, how much influence are they going to have, perhaps the European Union in particular?
I think the European Union has a powerful role to play. Croatia left Yugoslavia in 1991, in part because it wanted to move towards West European institutions. Now, if that is their ideal and their hope, the European Union must make absolutely clear to Croatia that the behavior of its troops, as we have seen in the past few days, and particularly its record with regard to human rights, must improve dramatically. Otherwise, there is no entry into European institutions.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed. In a moment,
as fears grow of a new conflict in the Balkans, with Croatia and Serbia squaring up to each other over control of eastern Slavonia, aid agencies say up to 250,000 refugees have now fled the Krajina region. Those who left after the Croat takeover have continued to come under ground and air attacks as they cross into northern Bosnia. And those heading for Serbia itself face a slow and difficult journey. Tonight we have 3 reports. From Nicholas Witchell, who's just entered the town of Bihac under siege for almost 4 years. From Matthew Amroli-Waller on the military build-up by Croatia and Serbia. And first, Ben Brown, who's been following the refugee crisis.
They were fleeing for their lives, but the Krajina Serb refugees in this convoy were attacked even so by Croatian warplanes. 5 of them killed, 15 wounded. The Croats claim they did it because they say the refugees were hiding soldiers, but the UN are demanding a full investigation. Other refugees, tens of thousands of them, have now made it to the Bosnian Serb town of Banja Luka, where relief workers are struggling to cope with this sudden and enormous influx of human beings. The aid agencies describe it as an emerging calamity. Some of these refugees are frail and old. Others have come into the world as their mothers fled, this newborn baby beginning his life as a refugee. So massive is this exodus that roads from west to east are completely clogged, as if there were one huge traffic jam across the former Yugoslavia. As many as 200,000 Serbs are now on the move. The Krajina has been emptied of virtually its entire population. Today we found these people crossing over the river from Bosnia into Serbia, where they hope and pray they'll be safe. Most of these refugees have been on the road now for 3, 4, even 5 days. They're hot, exhausted and extremely thirsty. They brought next to nothing with them. They say they simply didn't have time. They're just glad to have escaped with their lives. Some of them, though, like this 3-month-old baby, have fallen ill under the scorching sun on this marathon journey. The child's mother told me she's been travelling since last Saturday and that she's desperate to find a doctor. Another woman called Mira said she fled from the town of Petrinja on Friday. She has no relatives and she has no idea where she'll go now. Mingling among the civilian refugees are Krajina Serb soldiers, defeated, demoralized and dejected. These men at least are in no mood to fight for the Bosnian Serbs, as some have speculated they might. This Serb soldier, his wife and his children fled 5 minutes after the Croats started shelling Knin. I didn't mind being killed, Javica Maricic told us, but I didn't want my kids to be slaughtered. You can see I left without even the shirt on my back. Now we have absolutely nothing. These refugees are Serbs, so they know they may not attract that much international sympathy. Even so, they have lost their homes, their livelihoods, and often their loved ones. Ben Brown, BBC News, with the Krajina Serb refugees in Bosnia.
Our diplomatic correspondent Nicholas Witchell is among the first journalists to enter the Muslim town of Bihac in northwest Bosnia. Bosnian government forces have been defending the area against 3 armies for almost 4 years. It was declared a UN safe area last year.
Bihac, the town which has been under attack and in desperate straits for the past 3 to 4 years, a town where the United Nations said the humanitarian position was desperate, where the food warehouses, the UN said, were empty, which has been under attack by 3 armies, the Krajina Serbs, the Bosnian Serbs, and a rebel Muslim army. Well, the siege of Bihac has been relieved in the past half hour. Several vehicle loads of journalists have been brought in by the Croatian military authorities to an emotional welcome by the people of Bihac. People standing at the side of the streets, tears in their eyes, waving to the people arriving in the town. They, of course, have had very little food over these past months in particular. They now regard the Croatians as their saviors because it has been the Croatians who have relieved the siege of Bihac. And the Croatians will say, we have done what the United Nations and the international community was not able to do.
Croatia and Serbia have both begun moving troops towards eastern Slavonia, the last remaining area in Croatia held by rebel Serbs. They captured it 4 years ago. Croatian troops, including assault units, are reported to be moving to the border, and the Serbian army has also sent troops and tanks to the region.
Having all but taken Krajina inside 5 days, the Croatian army is gung-ho and it appears in no mood to stop. UN sources report a significant troop build-up around eastern Slavonia, the one area left in Croatia that's held by rebel Serbs. Another conflict looks ominously round the corner.
We observed 7 trucks carrying an unknown number of soldiers. Those are HV soldiers moving into the area of Osijek. We have also observed ARSK soldiers digging trenches around the zones of separation. In addition, there are reports of large numbers of people leaving the sector and moving into Serbia.
The Serbs, though, have reacted by sending tanks to their border with eastern Slavonia. The message to the Croatians is simple. If you want the land back, you'll have to fight for it. Something the Croatian defense minister said his country was quite prepared to do.
The territory is still occupied. Croatia will not give it up. Croatia will liberate it through force, if not through negotiations.
The politicians and generals in Croatia are being urged on by the people. They're on a nationalistic high. Of course, I think this belongs to Croatia, just like Knin or any other area, said this man. Eastern Slavonia should be liberated quickly, added another. Domestically popular it certainly would be, but the Croatian leadership know that a move on eastern Slavonia would be a huge military gamble, and a gamble which could go badly wrong. As a memorial service was held for a Danish peacekeeper killed over the weekend, the Croatian military formally apologized for using the soldiers as human shields. This war may be becoming increasingly complicated, but its human consequences are brutally simple. Matthew Amreliwala, BBC News, Zagreb.
Our correspondent Martin Bell joins me now from Sarajevo. Martin, is it brinkmanship by the Croat army, or are they really going to try to take eastern Slavonia?
Eventually, they're going to try to take eastern Slavonia. It's more important to them than any of the other sectors or krajinas taken in May, taken now. It's a question of timing. They have now to be seen to threaten, the Serbs have to be seen to defend. If it comes to a battle, it would happen at terrible cost, and we have always assumed up to now that they were going to do these things one at a time. Having said that, they are greatly emboldened by their success these past 5 days, and sometimes the conflagration can happen, as it were, almost by accident.
And meanwhile, the Bosnian Serbs are hopelessly split between the politicians on one side and their military leadership on the other. Will that split keep them quiet, or does it make them more dangerous?
It could make them more dangerous. UN sources here who have to deal with them talk of dealing, as it were, with 2 different governments. There are the politicians with the media behind them on the one side, and there are the soldiers. The entire High Command has now rallied to General Mladic. It will not accept or implement his demotion or the changes announced by Dr. Karadzic. So as far as the prosecution of the war is concerned, it is still the generals who have the power, and it is still the generals who are likely very soon to carry it again to their enemy.
Martin Bell, thank you very much indeed.
Other news now. Labour has
the Croatian army to let refugees leave in safety. But there are worries the understanding may not hold because Bosnian soldiers from Bihac, now allied to the Croats, have not given their agreement. Tonight, the United Nations Security Council is expected to issue Croatia with a tough series of demands to halt military action and to respect the human rights of the Krajinan Serbs. Up to 30,000 Serb refugees are believed to be trapped at Topusko. Their escape route to Banja Luka was threatened by a pincer movement by Bosnian troops from Bihac advancing over the border crossing of Dvor. A few miles to the south at Bosanski Novi, the United Nations reported that refugees had come under shell fire, suffering casualties. At the same time, Croatian troops in the Glina area were moving westwards. In our first report, ITN's diplomatic editor James Mates reports from Zagreb on the plight of the refugees.
The tide of humanity pouring out of Croatia and into Bosnia was unremitting. For dozens of miles, the roads were blocked with an entire population on the move. The UN are talking of a major calamity taking place along these very roads if what they're calling this sea of people are stranded in the middle of this war much longer. Already today, there are reports of refugees having been shelled by Croatian or Bosnian forces, with several dead. 120,000 are estimated to be on the road already. This exodus may total more than 200,000 before it's over.
We had a report from our field office in Banja Luka about refugees coming under what might have been artillery fire, what might have been bombing, what might have been gunfire. Our field officers actually helped transport 3 wounded people from the road to the hospital, and they said they saw 2 bodies lying on the road, some burnt out vehicles. They were told by the refugees that the refugees saw some aircraft, but our field officers did not hear or see any aircraft.
While the refugees were struggling through the battle zone, the victorious president of Croatia, Franjo Tuđman, was giving a medal of friendship and cooperation to President Alija Izetbegović of Bosnia. The armies of these 2 men have just scored the greatest victories in 4 years of war. The fate of the Serb refugees now lies in their hands. The UN says it has brokered an agreement between Croats, Bosnians and Serbs to allow 40,000 of those fleeing to escape into the relative safety of Serb-held Bosnia. They thought they had achieved a similar ceasefire agreement yesterday. It broke down within hours. The new deal was due to come into force an hour ago. Many thousands of lives may hinge on its success. A British aid convoy trying to get into the enclave of Bihac this afternoon was turned back for the 2nd day in succession. Not an encouraging sign for those hoping that humanitarian concerns will now take top priority. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has expressed his grave concern at the human rights situation. He said he is appalled at the loss of life and injury to the civilian population. He now plans to send 4 teams of human rights monitors into the Krajina region. The first will leave within the next few hours. James Mates, Channel 4 News, Zagreb.
A short time ago, we made telephone contact with the president of the International Red Cross, Cornelio Somaruga. Mr. Somaruga is in Banja Luka, the Serb-held area in northwest Bosnia, where many of those fleeing Krajina have begun to arrive. I began by asking him what condition the refugees are in.
We have here in Banja Luka 10,000 of displaced people on their way to the east, where further 10,000 of displaced persons are already crossing the border to Yugoslavia. These people, perhaps altogether around 100,000, are in very difficult because they are on their way since 2 to 3 days, and they need a lot of assistance.
Now, the Croatians are claiming that there are serving soldiers amongst the fleeing refugees. Can you substantiate that?
I have seen a number of military personnel, which is mixed with the civilian personnel fleeing. I didn't see any weapons in this personnel. I know that the authorities of the so-called Serbian Republic are trying to disarm those who are in possession of arms.
We have also had reports that columns of refugees have come under shell fire. Have you seen any evidence of wounded refugees?
I have visited an hospital in Banja where I've seen wounded persons, both men and women, which have been wounded yesterday by shelling by planes in the region of Petrovac.
And I've been speaking to the American ambassador to Croatia, Peter Galbraith. I began by asking him why the United States had failed to condemn the Croat attack on Krajina.
We did not condemn the Croatian offensive, but we did something much more important. We tried every possible way to prevent it. The United States was the principal sponsor of an international plan known as the Z4 plan with the Russian Federation and the European Union that sought to establish a political settlement in Croatia, providing the Serbs of the Krajina very substantial self-government in the areas where they were the majority. We pursued that track for 18 months. In the days before the Croatian action, I went to Belgrade, I met with the leader of the Krajina Serbs, and in fact, I got his agreement to a negotiation on the basis of that plan. The Krajina Serbs met the Croatian demands. Unfortunately, they did it too late, and the Croatians proceeded with the military action.
But you have also said that it amounts to a settlement in the long term. Now, that really puts you at odds with your allies.
Well, we tried to prevent it. It is an enormous human tragedy, with the population of the Serbs of the Krajina now having almost entirely departed. Incidentally, it's not ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is what the Bosnian Serbs did, which was the organized expulsion of human beings using terror tactics, mass murder, organized rape, and the like.
Well, how would you describe 200,000 Serbians fleeing in fright, in dread that they're going to be killed somewhere or another? How would you describe that?
These people left before these people left to avoid coming under Croatian rule. There is no evidence that the Croatians have engaged in the tactics of ethnic cleansing. We need to be precise about our terms here.
I put it to you that you are being somewhat complacent about the fact that we are now witnessing 200,000 people, old men, women and children, fleeing in fright, and you were saying that it doesn't amount to ethnic cleansing or whatever. It doesn't matter if it does or it doesn't, but we are witnessing a very sorry sight.
This is a very tragic event. It represents the departure of people who have been there for centuries, who have every right to be there, who have every right to have a very substantial self-government. It is something we tried very hard to avoid in the negotiating process right up to the last minute. We have put the government of Croatia on notice that we will be looking at their human rights record, at their treatment of civilians. We expect them to take every step possible to encourage people to return to their homes and to return to them in safety.
You have said that the offensive means that this is a basis for a long-term negotiated settlement. How do you figure that out?
That is not what we have said. What the Secretary of State has said, however, is that the offensive does alter the strategic balance in the region. The peoples who have been the victims of Belgrade-sponsored aggression, that is to say the Bosnian government, the Muslims, the Bosnian Croats, and the Croatians, have now developed a rough balance with the Serbian side.
The Bosnian government has in fact today expressed its fear that that will end up in a sort of stitch-up between the Serbians and the Croatians, whereby they carve up Bosnia.
I don't think that there's a danger of that. In fact, from what we see, the Federation of Croats and Muslims in Bosnia has never been stronger. The alliance between that federation with Croatia has never been stronger. Let's be clear about one point. The Croatians, when they became an independent country, Croatia, when it became an independent country, wanted two things. One was independence, and the other was to join the West. The Croatian government and the Croatian people understand full well that if they were to engage in the partition of a neighboring country, that the door to the West would be forever shut to them, and we would be at the lead of those who are shutting the door.
America's ambassador to Croatia, Peter Galbraith. Well, one of the greatest concentrations of refugees is in the town of Bihac in northern Bosnia, to which, as we heard earlier, an aid convoy tried and failed to get through today. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Gabby Rado, however, did manage to reach the town, the first Western television journalist to do so. This report from Bihac is just in.
After a 4-hour drive mainly through the desolate lands of what was Serb-held Krajina, we arrived at the border with Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Bihac enclave, so long isolated from the world. After 4 long years, the Bosnian army border post was not pointing its guns at the Serbs, but policing a frontier with friendly Croatian-held territory. Decorating the post was a picture of Bosnia's Muslim President Alija Izetbegovic.
The BH army, our army, also helped in the liberation.
Last Saturday, the 5th Corps of the Bosnian government army fought its way out to the west and linked up with the Croats, the most crucial breakthrough of the war for the Muslims.
Zadnje 4 godine bilo nam jako teško. The last 4 years, it was very difficult. We were isolated. Nothing was able to reach us. We were hungry most of the time. Yet we never gave up. We lasted out and awaited victory. God willing, there will be more victories. We're going to the end.
Inside the enclave, groups of people with food they'd just been given by the Croats. It's been months since the last aid convoy reached them. In June, the Red Cross reported from Bihac the first known cases of death by starvation of the Yugoslav conflict. How bad was it, says the woman? Well, what can I say? The soldiers came from the front. We didn't have anything to eat, let alone anything to give them. What can you say? We cried more than we were happy. These are people who have not only had to suffer attacks from all round the fragile fringes of the enclave Serbs, they're also victims of a bitter Muslim internecine war which broke out between the government forces and units who defected to the renegade local Muslim warlord Fikret Abdic, who made a pact with the Serbs. The Muslim rebels have now surrendered. It was eventually Bihac which provided the turning point of the wars in former Yugoslavia. For a long time, the Krajina Serb forces stayed inside their territory, but when they began joint attacks on the enclave with the Bosnian Serbs, the Croatians felt menaced. Bihac became a strategic stronghold which the Croats promised their allies the Bosnian government would never fall. Croatia used the massive attack on the Bihac enclave by both the Krajina and the Bosnian Serbs as its official reason for launching its offensive last Friday. The encircled Fifth Corps of the Bosnian government could hardly have dreamt it would be relieved so quickly. The question now is to what extent the Croatian army will help the Muslims further their war aims. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Bihac.
Even as the full extent of the current crisis emerges, fears are being expressed about the Croats' next move. They're believed to be heading for eastern Slavonia and the last Serb enclave on its territory. There are also reports of a large-scale build-up of Serbian troops on Croatia's eastern border. The United Nations is alarmed at the increase in tension, fearing the possibility of an all-out war. The Serb-held area of eastern Slavonia was once home to 100,000 Croatians. Peter Morgan of our diplomatic unit assesses whether the saber-rattling in the region might lead to a full-scale conflict.
In eastern Croatia, the people of Osijek are bracing themselves. Shops and houses are being boarded up as Croatian and rebel Serb forces maneuver around the truce line further east. There have been sporadic artillery exchanges around the town over the last 5 days. The United Nations fears Zagreb may take advantage of its military successes in Krajina to try and regain eastern Slavonia by force, and it's alarmed at the recent troop movements.
During the last days and in fact maybe 2 weeks, we have observed mobilization on both sides, in fact, inside the sector and in Croatia. Now during the last few hours, in fact, we got now information in, which is still not confirmed by the UN, information on large troop movements and heavy weapons down to the east, to the direction of sectaries. But again, that's very difficult at the moment to verify.
Belgrade has responded too. The UN reports around 150 Yugoslav tanks with artillery and infantry moving into northern Serbia over the last 2 days. It's not yet clear how serious both sides are about this confrontation. Observers, though, say Zagreb can't risk a direct battle with the Yugoslav army. Eastern Slavonia is a region of flat, fertile land which once separated Croatia from Serbia. For the last 3 years, it's been known as Sector East, a UN-protected area run by Croatian Serbs. On its border, the big industrial town of Osijek, scene of some of the worst fighting in 1991, and inside the sector, the broken town of Vukovar. Control of this region brings control of the river Danube, a vital trade route tied to valuable agricultural land. For the moment, both sides face each other across the truce lines. Croatian guards here checking lorries bound for Serbia. The UN fears Croatia's rapid victory in the Krajina may lead to domestic pressure for a move on eastern Slavonia. President Tudjman's policies will be tested at the polls next year, but opposition leaders in Zagreb want to hold back.
For Croatia now is not the
the proper momentum for going into Eastern Slavonia and Baranja, because it could provoke a response from the Yugoslav army and from Milosevic, a military response. But I think the main thing is that the balance of power is now re-established in a way, and there will be a balance of mutual fear, which will guarantee peace and enable negotiations.
The chances of miscalculation are very great. Over the last week, the Croats and the Serbs appeared to know the limits of how far each other could go. But the game is much more complicated. The Muslims, for instance, could launch offensives in Bosnia, which could draw in a Serb attack. And indeed, it is possible that the Croats will calculate that after their latest victories, they could move much more quickly.
Croatia's current alliance with the Bosnian army is still holding, but Zagreb's continuing action has revived fears in Sarajevo about the long-term future of the Bosnian-Croat Federation, though few will admit that in public.
I do believe that Croats feel that they shouldn't plan any surprise for Bosnian government and to impose any pressure on it just to take advantage of this situation. So I am more confident than those who open this issue of future relations between Croatia and Bosnia, assuming that Croatia is not sincere and that Croatia has some hidden agenda.
Public agreements then could hide private doubts. The Bosnian government knows the balance of power in the former Yugoslavia remains fragile. If Croatia stumbles into a conflict with Serbia over eastern Slavonia, they know the effects will, in time, be felt in Sarajevo.
Peter Morgan reporting. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Bosnia's Foreign Minister, Mohamed Shakir, who's currently in the Croatian capital, Zagreb. I asked him whether he was concerned that Croatia could now